Thank you very much, Pastor Joel, Max, Gabe, and the rest of the team here at Water. It is my second visit here, and this place has really changed from the first visit I came, and really God's blessing and grace is really on this place. So it's really wonderful, really wonderful. Okay, this evening we have an interesting topic that Pastor Samkyang called me at church and said, would you like to speak on this particular matter, the Putin's war and what's happening in Ukraine? And I said yes, only to realize that I actually don't know anything about the war. So I had to read up on it, and just as many of y'all did, I'm sure. So let me start by, I think I have done something wrong. I have not shared this thing yet. Okay, so what do I need to do? I need to mute button for the next 40 minutes, is it? Can I say, okay, share screen? And that one. Okay. Share. Great, thank you. Right, okay. So I'm going to basically do a quick take on what the war in Ukraine is all about. And then I'm going to ask essentially a single question. I'm going to put a simple proposition up front, and then we're going to revisit that very shortly. All right? Okay. Tonight we're going to talk about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which took place on the 24th of February, right, this year. Okay, let's see if the. All right, maybe I need to do it manually. It's not scrolling. It's scrolling because. Okay, so what we're going to do, all right. Okay, fine. All right. Okay, I want to start with a very simple proposition, something that most Protestant Christians will understand. What does being a Christian mean? Right? It means this: a Christian is a person in a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ, his Son. Everybody agree? Everybody agree? Yeah, no, nobody disagrees, right? Okay, fine. We have no Catholics and Orthodox Christians here. Okay, fine. So that is a proposition that all of us, especially as Protestant Christians, will find no difficulty with. And I'm going to put a pin there. I'm going to come back to this a little later on. All right. So what happened on the 24th of February? Okay. On the morning of the 24th of February, 2 a.m. Moscow time, President Vladimir Putin addressed Russia. He addressed the nation, okay, using a pre-recorded address. At that very same time, right, at that very same moment, Russian forces, which were surrounding Ukraine, opened fire into the country. Right? They began bombarding the nation itself. Okay, what happened was this thing didn't just happen overnight. Since Christmas of last year, there have been a total of 190,000 Russian soldiers that were being encamped around Ukraine itself. Ostensibly, in January, they were in the country of Belarus, which neighbors them, for exercises, military exercises with the Belarusian army. After they finished the exercise, they didn't go home. They stayed there. About 90,000 Russian soldiers stayed in Belarus. And the number of troops that were building up over the weeks itself began to worry NATO. All right, NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the biggest brother in there, of course, is the United States. They could see through their satellite imaging, there were more and more troops coming in, okay, right? Few days before the invasion itself, President Biden had announced and told the whole world and saying that Vladimir Putin is about to invade Ukraine. But there was a lot of disbelief. People weren't sure. Why would a modern state like Russia invade another modern state, European state, in the 21st century, right? Why would they do something like that? In fact, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was so irritated by this talk of an oncoming invasion that he actually said that the situation is not that bad. He was very irritated. But on the 24th, okay, it actually happened. The invasion began. So what caused this invasion? Tonight, we're going to actually look at the cause of invasion, and then we'll talk about what is happening over there later on. But what was the real cause of this invasion? There are two particular views on it. One, of course, it is all Russia's fault, all right, because they began the invasion, it was unprovoked attack. Ukraine wasn't doing anything to them. The other view is that it is NATO's fault. It is America's fault for provoking Russia into attacking. One of the proponents of the view that the West is at fault for this is an American professor called John Mersheimer of University of Chicago. He's a well-known political scientist, and in his mind, that it was the fact is that it was NATO and the United States that pushed, Russia into attacking Ukraine for the purposes of its own security. Now he claims that in geopolitics, you got to think like 19th century people. When he talks about 19th century people, he is saying that you got to think like actors, countries acting against countries, rather than people acting against people. It's countries acting against countries for their own interests. And when you talk at that level, what they call a geopolitical level, there's no morality. For them, when you're talking about geopolitics, as he says, all right, it's better to be Godzilla than Bambi, all right? Try not to be good, but be strong. In his view, that is why this particular invasion happened, all right? But I'm going to take a slightly different view. I'm going to tell you something about the man that actually started all this, all right? I'm going to tell you something about the man that looks at this. He looked at this, all right? NATO's expansion from 1949 all the way to 2000. It expanded and expanded until it covered most of the nations. Many of those nations were former Soviet satellite states. Many of them were former, Warsaw Pact countries, right? And yet, this expansion of it was the reason why the war happened. So, so say the geopolitics, okay? But really, I'm going to take you through the history of one particular man, Vladimir Putin. Right? Why we want to look at him? Well, it will come apparent in a moment. Vladimir Putin was born in 1950 in St. Petersburg. Right? St. Petersburg used to be called Leningrad when he was actually born there. It was part of the Soviet Union. All right? We don't know very much about who his father was, but all we know was that the father was in the security services. Was most likely KGB. Now, in the old Soviet Union, all right, if you were with the KGB, you're considered very privileged, in a privileged class, because the Soviet political apparatus used the KGB to keep them in power, to go against dissidents, all right, both domestically and foreign, overseas, So the KGB was a very powerful organization. It had its own culture, it had its own quarters. Their living accommodation was better than the average Russian. They could actually have a car when most average Russians cannot afford one, right? And all their children would be given the nice plum places in universities, Our friend Vladimir Putin was one of them. He was given a place in Moscow University, which is Russia's most prestigious university, and he went off and he studied there and qualified and graduated in 1975 with a degree in law. All right, word of warning: these fellas with law degrees will give you a lot of trouble later on, so you better be very careful. So he graduated in law and joined the KGB because that was always his ambition. All right, he rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel, and when he had risen up, he had joined and then risen up the ranks, but unfortunately he was posted into a place called Dresden. Dresden, at that time, was part of East Germany. Now, I'm looking at the faces here, and I'm probably guessing some of you will remember what it was like when we had the Soviet Union. At that time, all right, it was the Cold War. It was where the West and the East, West and East from the European perspective, was at odds with each other. In fact, they all had armies facing each other, and the flashpoint was the divide between East and West Germany. All right, and but things were changing when Putin was in the KGB. All right, Once he was in the KGB, one man became the General Secretary of the Communist Party. All right? The General Secretary of the Communist Party is the most powerful position in the Soviet Union. And that man Mikhail Gorbachev. All right? Gorbachev in 1985 to 1991 introduced two concepts, glasnost and perestroika. By doing so, he was trying to reform the Soviet Union so that it became more open and more liberal. Okay, I believe that something has gone wrong with the link, and the slides have all disappeared and it's gone missing again. I think we need to share screen again. All right. Okay. You can always trust technology to throw surprises. Okay. So Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan, okay, these two leaders, the President of the United States and General Secretary of the Soviet Union, were credited with ending the Cold War. And it ended in a very real way. Let's see if we can. Okay, now it's not moving again. As I say, you know, you really screw things up, you get a computer, okay, it will oblige. All right, okay, fine, let's go. All right. And the Berlin Wall fell in November of 1989. I remember I was a university student in Australia. I had some friends from Germany who were studying there with me. They were German exchange students, and we were watching the Berlin Wall break down. And all I could see the Germans, my German friends were, they stared at it with their mouths wide open. And Matthias Bendu, who's a lawyer in Germany now, turned to me and said, I never thought I would see this in my lifetime. Okay, but that was a huge cataclysmic change itself. Right? After that, whole of Eastern Europe was in chaos. To Vladimir Putin, the fall of the Berlin Wall was a catastrophe to his world. For a KGB agent, for a man that's been brought up in KGB family, he suspects everybody, trusts nobody. He believes the United States is behind everything evil in the world. That's him. That's his thinking, and that's his mind. And during that particular time itself, he was at the KGB headquarters and people were demonstrating for their freedom, including the Germans in Dresden. And they went up to the KGB headquarters. That's a picture of it now. It's now in ruins. They went up to the KGB headquarters while Putin and his colleagues were burning all the papers they could find. All right, they were trying to keep secrets, and they went up there, and Putin basically told them, he said, "Look, you come here, we will shoot you because we are armed." All right, and he shooed them all away. Actually, to Putin's great regret, actually he called Moscow and he called the Red Army. The Red Army said, "We can't do anything. Moscow is not answering." So his whole world collapsed, and when the world itself collapsed itself, many in the KGB lost their positions, because when the KGB is gone, when the whole old Soviet apparatus is gone, all right, what can you as a security man do? The new world is come about, and power, the base of power had shifted and changed, all right? So many of the KGB fellas ended up from being one of the most influential people becoming irrelevant. They only became security people, head of security in companies, and the oligarchs rose. All right. So the end of the Cold War, what happened was the Soviet Union broke up into 15 countries. Among the countries is, of course, Ukraine and Georgia. All right. I'm going to move on a bit. So what did Putin do? Putin was out of a job. He had nowhere to go. So he decided to go into politics. Now, one thing Putin was good, he was a very good bureaucrat. So he became an assistant to the mayor of St. Petersburg, Anatoly Sobchak. And he was very good at his job. He was so good that within 10 years, he rose all the way up to be one of the first deputy prime ministers of Russia at that time, under Boris Yeltsin in August of 1999. And when Yeltsin retired, among his three deputies, he chose Putin to take over as president. Okay, but here he is, a man who was always traumatized by the collapse of the Soviet Union, felt that the Soviet Union was belittled and actually treated badly by the West, no respect whatsoever. And he was always carrying this particular seed of insecurity in itself, all right? A lack of a fall in the position of Russia. In fact, so much so that in 2007, he attended the Munich conference, a biennial conference on security. And he said two things to them, okay, all right? Number one, he said, the expansion of NATO, all right, adding all these new countries, getting closer and closer to Russia is a threat to Russia's security. That's number one, okay? And number two, he also said that, all right, the fall of the collapse of the Soviet Union was the worst geopolitical event of the 20th century. It was the worst event in his life. He mentioned that. But he warned the West against expanding NATO. But did the West listen? No, they didn't. In fact, the very next year, in April 2008, NATO said we will welcome Ukraine and Georgia to apply for NATO membership itself. Immediately after that, okay, he invaded Georgia in 2008. People don't realize that Ukraine is not the first country that he's invaded, okay? He has gone into Syria, all right? That is later, but the first former Soviet state he invaded was Georgia. There, he only took 12 days to get what he wanted, okay? He went in there, he intimidated the government of the day itself, got them to concede, make certain concessions, all right, and took away 2 small sections of Georgia, which had a lot of Russian people living in it. So he got those and called them independent states, all right? He's doing the same thing in Ukraine. So, but what really scared him was the few years that he was not president. He became prime minister from 2008 to 2012. In Russia, the post of president and prime minister both exist. President is the head of state. Prime minister is like the guy that runs the government, okay? So he became prime minister and he let Dmitry Medvedev become president. But Medvedev was one of those reformers. He allowed a lot of freedom, a lot of people. He was saying that we need to change Russia. So let's discuss the biggest problem we have. What's the biggest problem? Corruption, all right? And who is the biggest, most corrupt politician? They say Putin. So in 2011, there were demonstrations against Putin, all right, in the streets of Moscow in Red Square, and it scared him. It scared him, being even more scared. And he always said it's the Americans that actually instigated this. All right. And in 2012, when Medvedev finished his term, he made sure Medvedev became prime minister again. He made himself president and stayed there until today. He would never give up. All right. And in 2014, all right, that was 2011. 2014, his friend Viktor Yanukovych, okay, who was president of Ukraine, was very, very corrupt. He was a very corrupt man. He was actually pushed out by his own people in 2014, during what is called the Euro-Maidan protest. Euro means they were looking towards Europe. Maidan is the square. It's a picture of a square you see in Kiev right now. The protest was so severe, the guy ran off in the middle of the night, okay, because he ran to Putin for help. Then what happened in the very same year, in 2014, Putin acted again. Because of that, what happened in Ukraine, he invaded and took Crimea. Crimea is a small little peninsula at the bottom of Ukraine, right? Russia already has a naval base there. So he got the Navy and the soldiers based there to come out and just take over the whole area there. That started a civil war, which is ongoing until today. If you remember MH17, okay, all right, our Malaysian Airlines 777 was flying over the area and shot down mistakenly by the separatists over there. It happened in 2014, all right? All right, I don't have to tell you, in 2019, okay, another law graduate called Volodymyr Zelensky, okay, he won the Ukrainian presidential election. It was a parliamentary and presidential election, and he won the presidency. This got Putin even more fearful, because Zelensky is 100% pro-Western. And his platform was this: you vote for me, we will join NATO and we will join the European Union. 73% of the votes went to him. He beat the other, Poroshenko, his opponent, flat. So when he won by such a huge margin in itself, that was when Putin got even angrier and even less secure. All right. So what was his reasons for expanding into Ukraine? All right. He said the NATO expansion to include Ukraine was encouraged by the US. He also believes that Ukraine is not a separate country. All right. In fact, Ukraine should be part of a greater Russia. To him, Russia comprises of Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. All these are all Russian countries in itself. All right. And he also he also said that this special military organization on the night of the 24th of February, he said, was actually to depose a neo-Nazi regime, all right? A neo-Nazi regime that was running Ukraine. That is in fact totally false because President Zelensky is a Jew. I can't imagine a Jew and being a neo-Nazi. I think it's almost like an oxymoron. And the second thing is that the 2019 election, all the neo-Nazi far-right parties lost every seat. They don't even have a single seat there. In fact, they were so badly defeated, they fell into obscurity. So there is no neo-Nazi in the government. But nevertheless, he still based it on his very, very strange ideas. You see, the problem is Vladimir Putin actually is not uncommon. People like him are not uncommon, all right? People like him are not common because they are gripped by insecurity. Insecurity is a form of fear. We find that in many, not just presidents like him, okay? We also find that in people in our own families, like mine, all right? In companies, in associations, sometimes even among people in our churches, all right? It's a common issue and a problem in itself, all right? And if you look at Putin, Putin is driven by that insecurity because for him, his whole world has collapsed, okay? And it's being threatened when in fact it is not. It is not being threatened at all whatsoever. But nevertheless, he sees it that way. And as a result, he reacts so badly, right? Okay, and what do we do about people like that? Well, you can tell what an insecure person and a secure person does, how differently they react to situations, you know. An insecure person will always worry about how do people see me. Vladimir Putin is very vain. He always has TV on him. How he appears to the public is very important. He takes off his shirts and rides horses to show that he is a strong and a virile man itself, you know. He loves to sometimes do, and he is good. He's a black belt in judo. He would demonstrate judo throws at the dojo every time he has a chance to do so. All right, okay? He never blames himself. He blames others for the misfortune, okay, that befalls him. He blames others for the misfortunes and the problems that Russia is facing right now, of course. And he is the oligarch of oligarchs. There is some explanation that he's worth between 100 to 200 billion US dollars. We really don't know. We really don't know. But there is a massive palace in Russia on the banks of the Crimean Sea, all right, that has a no-fly zone and is just, you know, it's just absolutely palatial, and everybody suspects it belongs to Vladimir Putin. And as far as he is concerned, all right, his worldview is the only one that's correct. You can tell him the truth. You can show him evidence. It doesn't matter to him, all right? That's why he thinks that neo-Nazis are the ones running Ukraine, all right? And most importantly, he's the most important person in the world as far as he's concerned, right? Many people who are insecure are like this. It sounds a little bit like narcissism, all right? But perhaps the narcissism is there to make up, to cover up for certain things they lack, okay? A certain confidence that we have, all right? Now, why I've chosen such a global event to focus on what is a personal thing like this is simply because this, you see, when God sent his son to save the world, he has to do it one person at a time, okay? He does it one person at a time. You don't see Jesus coming and preaching anywhere in the Bible or geopolitical issues. He doesn't. He talks about you, okay, and me as persons. Because you see, the root of a lot of problems that we have in the world today, right? As Pastor Chu likes to say, you know, the heart of the matter is a matter of the heart. Why I like to use Putin up there is because if you contrast him and look at what Medvedev did in the 4 years that Medvedev was president. When the 4 years when Medvedev was president, okay, he was a more confident, secure man. Everybody thought Russia was changing. Everybody said that we can work with him. Russia is opening up. We can allow, you know, Russia to join the world community. Of course, people will say that's just Western propaganda. Let's put that aside for the time being. But the fact that people looked at it and it was a very hopeful Russia tells you because the leader himself had confidence. He wasn't born with all this baggage that he had. Wasn't an KGB before, right? That allowed for a better Russia, not a Russia today that's attacking their, in fact, the Ukrainians are their relatives, okay? They are both Slavic nations, right? They share a common history, right? And yet for this to happen itself, it's just mind-boggling, okay? Right? So why God will have to save one person, save the world one person at a time? Well, at the end of the day, it's to deal with our own issues. When we read in the Bible, in Philippians 2, basically when Paul exhorts us to work out our salvation in itself, we are basically working out our salvation, not just to be in heaven with Christ when we die, but to save us from our fears, from our challenges, from the things that actually basically prompt us to be the worst part of ourselves itself, right? And in the Bible, we have a very classic case of a ruler who was so insecure about his position, Saul. He was so insecure about David, he basically wanted to kill him, right? If you think about that. And the other thing that we must bear in mind is that once we have to understand that the purpose that we lead is actually God's purpose. And God also has a purpose for us, all right? If we trust in him and we believe that he has a purpose for our lives, in Jeremiah 29:11, for instance, right? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. If you know that and you hang on to that, what will you be scared about? You will have nothing to be afraid. Yes, there will be scary moments, but at the end of the day, all things work for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. All right? And more than anything else, we also must realize that for us to deal with this, it's a process. You got to do it slowly. It takes time. It doesn't happen immediately. And how does all this thing happen? How does God do it with us? By having a personal relationship with each of us. If you think about it, I even dare postulate this. If a person is self-confident, okay, if Putin had been more secure in his person, a bit like Medvedev, he would see the West as people he can build a relationship with, rather than enemies. He would respect the Ukrainians having their own identity, but having a shared Slavic culture. He will know that power alone does not guarantee security. It's the pursuit of peace does. But for him, I have to be powerful, all right? He'll put the welfare of the people, okay, first in a genuine way, and not through the revival of a super state. He wants to recreate the Soviet Union, because to him, that's the only way I can secure myself. I have friends from my cell who've just come back from Russia. All right, they were evacuated by Shell because Shell had sold their interest in Russia, and they tell me this: the sanctions that are happening right now are affecting their friends, their people, okay? Prices of food have gone up. Things are, fuel and petrol already becoming very expensive, and they don't know how long this is going to last. So if Putin actually put his people first, all right, he would think about these things, but I doubt very much he would. And I like to think this, he would think like a 21st century person, not a 19th century person, all right? Not a person that thinks in the world purely in terms of geopolitics, all right? Now, I know I haven't answered many of the questions, what's happening in Ukraine, why, and all other stuff. We can always talk about that during the question and answer time. But basically, the end of the day is this: when we are working out our salvation, okay, it is not working for salvation because we are already saved, right? Our salvation, right, is to save our souls for eternity and saves our humanity for the glory of God. That's what we always have to bear in mind. All right? Okay? May the Lord have abundant mercy on the peoples of Ukraine and Russia. All right? Thank you. Thank you.